everyone, welcome to Crank It Up Podcast, the YouTube home of Brigand Games. I'm Jim Price, and this is my 5th designer diary, talking today about keywords. I hope you all had a great holiday break and are having a great new year, and I'm excited to talk about this topic of keywords, which was inspired by a recent comment on one of our playthrough videos, talking about the number of keywords in Erudia. The idea of keywords is a little bit of a divisive debate. There are many people who love keywords, there are many people who hate them. Where do we fall on the spectrum? Obviously, if you've been following along for the previews, you would guess based on the number of quantity of keywords that we have that I'm in favor of keywords, and that's true. And I want to talk about why that is and what I think are the benefits. I do think there are some risks to having a keyword-driven game, but maybe it's my background coming from programming, which is all about keywords and programming languages and drilling things down to as few words as possible for repeatable purposes. Maybe it gives me a little bit of bias, but from my perspective, I've always enjoyed when games use keywords. One of the biggest arguments against them is that they can be a little bit of a barrier to entry. They make the game not as accessible because the card itself is not telling you what it does. You're relying on the card to trigger a memory from the rulebook. Maybe if there's a keyword you don't recognize, you have to go and look it up. And that's a perfectly legitimate complaint to an extent. And I say to an extent for a couple of reasons. One, I think that there is no substitute for reading a rulebook. They exist for a reason. Obviously, I'm a podcaster and I do a lot of videos, and I know the power of videos. But I don't think they're ever a full substitute for actually reading through the rules of a game and trying to memorize it or trying to understand what's going on. When you do a video, you're often at the mercy of the reviewer or the presenter, making sure that they didn't leave out any key details or get any details wrong. When you read a rulebook, you're going to the primary source and you're getting all the information that you need. But with respect to keywords, there's usually something that goes on beyond the definition of the word. There are some important reminders that need to be remembered that you wouldn't necessarily get unless you were looking at the definition of the keyword. And that's really important because what you want to do is you want to have someone have a consistent application of the keyword, just as you are having a consistent application of the keyword when you're designing cards in card text games. What could be a barrier to entry, I actually think is a barrier to exit when you use keywords appropriately. What I mean by that is that I'm less likely to move away from a game if they use keywords well. It may be harder to get in, but it also makes it easier to stay because of that barrier to exit. A great example is actually Marvel Champions. Now, their use of keywords is not perfect, but they're fairly, they go fairly wide with it. They do add new ones, and they do a pet peeve of mine, which is where they tell you the keyword and then they immediately define it, which makes you question the point of the keyword. And sometimes that's necessary if it's retroactive or if they're introducing it. One of the things about Marvel Champions is that they have this large rules reference, but then they add smaller rule books to introduce new keywords. That's something that we're actively trying to avoid. As I've expressed before, I want one rule book that is a source of all information and not really deviating from that. But there are three main approaches with keywords. One is don't use them, don't embrace them, or use them to the smallest extent possible. The second one is to do what I just mentioned, which is to define the keyword and use it at the same time, which I'm not a fan of because it's just taking up space. And the third one is to use them heavily and to fully embrace the concept, which is what we're doing. And why? One of the biggest reasons is that it saves a lot of space. There are multiple things that have to be conveyed in a short amount of physical space on the card, and you don't want to make the font super tiny. It's a trade-off between how much information do you want to express, how expressive do you want the abilities to be, and how readable should it be at first glance? Do you want someone squinting at it, holding it up close, trying to read it, or should it be fairly legible? The more keywords you use, because of the shorthand nature of them, the more space you're going to get, the larger the font can be, the better it's going to be. And because we want to have a fixed space on the card size for it, you want to show off as much art as possible, so you have to restrict yourself to the card. You have to sort of divide it in half. This is going to be your art size, and everything below it is going to be your text size. Something has to give. So when cards could be as short as possible and concise as possible, I think that's a very good thing because it allows you to be very expressive with your abilities and create cool effects. One of the worst things is where you've got this great idea for a card, but you don't know how to express it in the space that's allotted. Because, if it's fairly involved, you want the card to explain as much as possible. One thing I'm not a fan of is where you need a combination of card and clarification in order to properly understand the card. I think a card should express exactly what it's trying to do. The clarification should be there to avoid misinterpretations. It shouldn't be just like a go look at this clarification to actually understand what's going on sort of phenomenon. And I've seen that in plenty of games, and it's never fun. And it's a giant waste of time. But there's a lot that you can gain by using keywords appropriately. And there are three main things I think you can get. The first is consistency, the second is teachability, and the third is opportunity. Let's break each of those down. Consistency. One of the things I really don't like is when you have multiple cards that are roughly doing the same thing and using different language in order to achieve that effect. This is frustrating for a number of reasons. One is that it's never clear exactly if cards are behaving the same way. You have to sort of dig into it and see, okay, are they doing anything different? Why is the wording different? Is it intentional that the wording is different? Because this is a card text game where language is everything, I would think that if something is different, there's probably a reason why, instead of it just being an oversight. When you structure everything around keywords, you're much more likely to get that consistency because it ties the definition and the heart of what you're trying to do into that keyword. This can manifest itself in a number of really practical ways, such as searching. If you've ever used, whether it's a Word document or an online, compository of all these cards, like Marvel Champions has one, for example, you want to search for card text. Well, when card text is constantly changing, it makes it very hard to see, okay, well, what cards are acting like this, or what cards could I combine because they're behaving in a similar way? That's what happens when you're constantly changing the text. But when you have a keyword, then you can search for the keyword, and all of a sudden those cards are linked 100%. And you know, okay, this is doing the same thing as this thing because it's using the same keyword. That to me is extremely important. There have been a number of games where I have Word documents of all the cards, and when I search, I have to search across several different formats because of the lack of consistency between cards. If there's an idea that I can just tie into a keyword and I can search for that keyword with certainty, it is much better and I spend much less time doing it. And for the type of game that we want to design that has that richness and that depth, that's going to be absolutely key. So that's consistency. What do I mean by teachability? When you see a keyword that you don't know, what are you going to do? You're going to look up in the rulebook in a specified designated section. If you're doing it well and you have a keyword section that's alphabetical, you know exactly where to look. In other words, you have created one place where everything you need to know about that keyword can be found. Additionally, there's a lot that can go on behind the scenes that people may not be aware of, and that's a great place to call it out because you don't want to have to repeat the implications of a keyword on several cards. And a great example of this is with the idea of assigning a unit into play. Now, assign is not my favorite keyword, admittedly. We struggled with this. There's a reason why I didn't want to use summon or place. Again, largely because of searching. You wanted a unique word that can tie all these ideas of assigning cards together. I chose assign because play is sort of the generic word that's used for actually playing something. Deploy and assign are two other ways of entering play, and they're both military terms, and because it's a battle game, it makes sense that, the idea of assigning would have something to do with the unit. But regardless, assign has a very particular meaning because the unit is not, in fact, being played, it is entering play. This means that only certain parts of the card resolution order actually trigger, namely its ready state. It does not trigger any on-play reactions. It is not subject to any interrupts. Assignment has very specific meaning. And I can't convey all that on every single card that uses assignment. It would take up too much space. But if I were to use a word like put into play, that's maybe a different phrase, but if I'm searching for it, I'd have to search for put into play. Again, that's also going to be 3 words compared to 1. And that would be harder to make as a keyword because it's more of a key phrase. Anytime I can use one word, it's much better. So now, as a result, I have cards that will have a clear way of searching for them because they have one single word that tells you that this will put a unit into play without triggering any reactions. That means nothing good and nothing bad. Now, the nothing good doesn't sound like it's that great. In fact, it's a bad thing. You generally want the on-play reactions. But sometimes you don't. And there's an example of this with the clerics, with the martyr. Because the martyr has the ability cancellation tied directly into the attack, that's great, because that means that if you assign it, it's not going to trigger the attack ability. And that's something that, is clearly stated in the definition of assign. That means that effectively it bypasses this negative condition on the card by putting it directly into play, allowing you to get VP. Now, before people start freaking out, this is 1, intentional and tested. 2, it's actually harder than the other way, which is typically to play it 1 turn, go really defensive, maybe throw up a barrier, and then hope that the units stay undamaged or heal them on the actual turn. It's another avenue. So you can see, all right, if you're looking at the martyr and you want to see synergies, you need to look into ways to actually assign units into play. So you start searching for that, and that's how you build your synergy. That's great because it tells you everything that you need to know about assignment. It teaches you that concept, and then it goes from there into opportunity. And the martyr is one example of an opportunity, but I want to use an actually different example, which is the idea of hunting. So hunting says to reveal cards from your deck until you reveal a card of the specified qualifier or card type. So an example of this would be the apothecary, which hunts for an item. You're going to one at a time reveal cards from the top of your deck until you find an item, because it's the type that's specified, and you're going to draw it. And then you're going to shuffle all the unused cards, if there are any, into your deck. Hunting is less strong than searching, because searching gives you exactly what you want, but hunting guarantees that you get something, you just don't know what it is. It's a way of nerfing cards when an ability is too strong. And it's very useful, and we use hunting a lot. Well, think about what that would be if we didn't have the keyword. With the apothecary, the current text is hunt for an item. Attack, hunt for an item. Really great, doesn't take up a lot of space, clearly indicates what's going on. If I didn't have that keyword, I would have to say attack. Reveal cards from your deck until you reveal an item, draw it, and then shuffle in any unused cards back into your deck. Well, if there was any other ability that was going on, all of a sudden I've used a lot of space to convey a fairly straightforward ability. That relates to the card space, but it doesn't really show you the opportunity, because I want to ask a very practical question. How would you react to something like a hunt without the keyword? If I were to build up a card that wanted to use that concept and give you some benefit for doing it, what would that look like? Well, you could say, after you reveal and draw a card, well, there's many ways that cards can be revealed and drawn outside of a hunt. It wouldn't be clear, am I accidentally over-opportunizing and giving more opportunities for synergy, which you have to be careful because it's unexpected, which you never want. You always want to be able to expect synergies. But even worse than that is confusion, because when I talk about a barrier to exit, when I get frustrated, when I don't know, when I feel like I'm constantly trying to figure out if things are working or not, that makes me wonder, is this even a game I want to continue to pursue? Instead, I want to make it crystal clear and create opportunities for synergy. So if I were to say, after you hunt for a card, it is very clear, because if the action is hunting, that means that any action that I want to be like that will include the word hunt. You absolutely know that this card that reacts to it is going to be triggered by the card that is actually doing the hunt. And there's a lot of great opportunities that we can get as a result of this. We have the apothecary. Deplete has an option that can spend 3 morale in order to hunt for a card type of your choice. That's very clearly going to be a hunt. But down the line, we have a card in the generals that's called Vossler. Vossler has an ability that once per turn allows you to, after you hunt for a card, you can play it immediately. Now, I want to state that this is not fully play tested, and this is a prototype card. It is not the usual card artwork. Every time I show these, I just have to be wary of that. But I want to show you in this format to let you know that this is something that's coming in the future. This is something that we know is in the game. That means that when it comes time to test it, we have to consider it against every single hunt ability, which is easy to find out because we could easily search for it because we've tied it to a keyword. Think about what this does in terms of intrigue to a card like AOC Encounter. AOC Encounter is a fairy card where your rival chooses the effect you're going to get. Either they discard a unit or you hunt for a unit. Well, if Vossler's out in play, that's going to change what they're thinking about hunting for a unit, and they're going to be more inclined to discard it. It's a really cool effect that we're building into the future, made possible because of the keyword. They're going to be much less likely to want to hunt, to allow you to hunt for a unit if they know that you can play it immediately. And that's what is the whole point of keywords. Keywords are what's making that possible, because it's unquestionable that these two words are going to interact, and the opportunities that it creates, it means that you can use hunt as much as you want, and then you can start building reactions to hunt. You can build interruptions to hunt. I could foresee a card like, when you hunt for a card, the person has a chance to say, no, not that card, and keep going. There are so many interesting things that you can do, and that's all made possible because of keywords. Yes, it does mean that there are more things that you're going to have to learn, but for me, it's all about that trade-off. I would take clarity over what's perceived as complexity. To close with this, I want to talk about Magic the Gathering, a game that I haven't played for about 12 years. I played it once about 12 years ago, and I hadn't played that before then for longer than I could remember. I remember playing probably about 7th grade was the last time before that. So with Magic, I don't remember very much about the rules. I'm not entirely sure how many cards you draw or what card or when you actually draw them. I think it might be the start of the turn, but that's not really important. I can name very few cards that actually combine name and ability with what they do, Counterspell being one of them. I could, of course, name the 5 colors. But out of all the cards that I've played, I can't name very many combinations of names and abilities. Definitely can't remember mana costs. But I remember keywords. I remember First Strike, Flanking, Trample, Flying, Shadow. It's funny, it's the keywords that have actually lasted and survived the test of time. When I was playing Marvel Champions and I saw that there's Overkill, it's like, oh, Trample, got it. And it's funny because everything gets compared. It's not the keywords itself are not the problem. It's misusing them. It's coming up with bad keywords. Now, I like to think that keywords are something that we refine over time before we actually release the rules. That way we'll be consistent. I use keywords for now. Maybe a sign changes, maybe it doesn't. When we do have a final name, rest assured that everything that uses that concept will use that keyword. But hopefully I've shown, why we're using such a keyword-heavy approach. When we label something as an attack, there are many cards that will let you attack again. It's unquestionable as to what is actually being repeated there, and it provides great opportunity. There's an entire class that's coming later that's built around the idea of attacking again. And you see that and you go, oh, that's great. Show me all the cards that are units that have attacks, and now I got all my synergies planned out. There's a lot of opportunity. The consistency and the teachability are so crucial to a game like this. We know that it's not really meant to be a casual game. It can be played casually, but it's really meant to reward the people who are investing the time. Personally, I'd rather invest the resources in making it as easy to teach as possible. Videos, references, there's a wiki that's being built that will show everything. Teach people up front so that I could save space in the card so that I could express them nicely, consistently, and in providing as many opportunities as possible. That's what we want out of keywords. I do understand that this is a very difficult topic and people are on both sides. There are people on the team who aren't as big of a fan of keywords, but they've managed to get by so far because of the controls that we put in place to make sure that they're consistent. Please let me know in the comments what you think about keywords, but for now, let's shut it down.